Hi. Uh, haven't been up to much. Been very busy lately, and also a lot of stuff going on in life, I guess. But yesterday I finished work. I often start very early in the morning, so therefore I finish relatively early as well. So I had a couple of hours free before I had to pick up my kid from school, and so I looked at a few places. Actually, I only looked at one place. A few. I looked at another few this morning, but I'll talk about that in a moment. But I looked at one place which I haven't been to in ages, and actually they had a decent amount of stock, but the area that it was in is a lot of Chinese people live in that area. Auckland's got a pretty sizable Chinese community. I don't know the exact percentage, but it's they make up a decent chunk of our population. And there are certain areas of the city that I guess is like in most cities, different ethnic groups congregate in different areas, kind of make their own community within those areas. So there's a few areas around Auckland that um, I like that. Anyway, this one area, I noticed that a lot of the CDs in the secondhand charity shop were Chinese language, Chinese artists. Um, almost a good quarter of the stock, which is, usually you'll see a few foreign, like Chinese or Korean things in secondhand CDs, but only one or two. But to find, a good proportion of them to be Chinese, it's quite unusual. But like I said, it was a Chinese area, and so I guess that's why. They also had the a more recent U2 album there, um, songs of experience, and I was like, oh, because I actually talked about that in a video in the last couple of months, how I said I hadn't listened to any of those recent U2 albums, and I was kind of interested in picking one up, and I saw it, and I grabbed it, and as soon as you pick up an empty CD, you can feel that just that small weight difference. Happened again this morning actually, but so I picked it up, and as soon as I picked it up, I was like, oh, and I opened it up, and it was empty, which is I never understand that whether people who drop them off don't realize that the CD's not inside, or more worryingly, it's been stolen, which is just insane if true. Because at this place, the CDs were $1 each. And one time when I was buying them, they always ask you. They say, "Oh, have you checked inside to make sure the CD's there?" Because quite often they're not. As you know, I always do check if possible. And one of the old guys, one of the volunteer workers at one of the shops, a few months ago, he said, "Yeah, we get quite a lot of these stolen." And I was like, it's stole, like people are stealing $1 charity secondhand CDs without the cases. And he's like, yep, you'd be surprised. And so that's why some of the shops tape them up. The stock comes in, the store checks it, make sure it's there, and then they tape it so it can't get stolen. But God, things must be bad if people are stealing goddamn secondhand compact discs without the case. But anyway, I found two things yesterday. There was one other CD I was almost going to get. It was by the guitarist Steve Morse. Steve Morse, I know, was in Deep Purple, one of the iterations, one of the many iterations of Deep Purple. And so I recognized his name. I was almost going to get it, but I didn't, just because I wasn't in the mood to take a punt, I guess. But I got these two. These were $1 each. Here we have the Chills, which this is a best of collection, Heavenly Pop Hits, the best of the Chills. Now, the Chills, I would assume if you were from New Zealand, you wouldn't know. Chills are a New Zealand, I guess, indie sounding rock band. When I say indie, they're from the 80s, so they're from a different kind of indie. And they're indie as in they were on an independent label. They were on Flying Nun Records, which is independent. And the Chills are kind of held up as one of the great New Zealand rock pop acts, a little bit lesser known than some of the other ones that people might have heard of, like Split Enz or Crowded House or Shihad or things like that. They came out of Dunedin, and I've talked about this before in one of the other videos, that Dunedin is a small city. I say it's about the first, second, third, fourth or fifth largest city in New Zealand, but by the time you get to that level, you're down. I think there's over 100,000 people, maybe, but it's a pretty small city, and it's right at the bottom of the South Island, so it gets pretty cold down there in the winter. Pretty grey. It was actually founded by the Scottish Presbyterian settlers in the whatever 1800s, and so it has a very Scottish feel about the city, and the weather is actually quite Scottish as well, very grey and rainy, and gets quite cold, but it's also in a position that allows it access to some of the most beautiful parts of the South Island, like Central Otago, and I guess if you had time, you could drive across to Fiordland and places like that. So, but anyway, it was a small city, and they had a kind of music scene there in the late 70s, early 80s with, I don't even know how you would term the music, influenced by punk, but also quite kind of jangle pop. And some of the bands that we associate with that, the Dunedin sound, as we call it, are the Chills. Who are those other guys? The Clean, the Verlaines. A bit later on, Straight Jacket Fits. There are lots of other bands, and I'm not that familiar with them. To be honest, that whole Dunedin sound thing never really appealed to me. It was a bit before my time, and the stuff that I have heard of it, I've always, it's okay. I like Straight Jacket Fits, and I think Shane Carter from Straight Jacket Fits is a great songwriter. And also, I read Shane Carter's book recently, Dead People I Have Not, or not recently, probably about 2 years ago, but he's a brilliant writer as well. Sometimes you'll read something, like at the moment, I'm reading, hang on, I'll just get it. I read a lot of musician biographies, so I'm reading Duff McKagan's autobiography. It's so easy. And I would guess he had a ghostwriter on this, because just you can tell, and I might be wrong, but this is not bad at all. It's an interesting book if you like Guns N' Roses. Even if you don't like Guns N' Roses, it's kind of just, seeing the ascent of a band that went as high as Guns N' Roses did is interesting from the perspective of someone inside the band, and also his own personal issues. And it's a good book. But when I read it, I don't feel any kind of connection to Duff. And I don't mean that in a bad way. He just seems like quite a different person than I am. When I read Shane Carter's book, Dead People I Have Known, which I think is the title, it felt like I knew him intimately. That sounds weird, doesn't it? Intimately. But I felt like I really knew it. And I felt like, I don't know, so many ways he wrote and ways he described, I felt like it feels exactly the same as I think. And he's a bit older than me, Shane Carter. I'd say he's about 10 years older than me, at least. But he had the same kind of thinking. I don't know, it's hard to describe it. And probably most people watching this have no idea who Shane Carter is. He's a musician in a relatively, for New Zealand, mid-level act. Didn't really find much fame outside New Zealand, but yeah, I don't know, kind of a tangent. Anyway, back to the Chills. So Chills were primarily, it's Martin Phillips. He's the main songwriter, and apparently they're still going today, but they've kind of been up and down and had peaks and troughs. Apparently in the career of the Chills, from when they were formed, I think in the early 80s through till today, they've had like 50 members. It's Martin Phillips has been the only, the only person in it. So here we go. This kind of goes through the phases. So Chills phase 1 was Martin Phillips and Peter Gutteridge. Peter Gutteridge is another Dunedin flying nun kind of, I guess, icon. He passed away a couple of years ago. And then we got phase 2. Phase data goes all the way down, and we're up to phase 14, and this is 92, because this was put out in 1994. And since then they've had more. And I know Martin Phillips had some pretty major health issues. He had hepatitis C, but I think he was like quite close to death. But I think he had that, that treatment they have now that can basically cure you from hepatitis C, which is pretty amazing. I think he went through that, and he's recovered. This was originally, so this is actually third hand, because whoever originally bought it second hand from Real Groovy for $11, and I bought it third hand for $1 at the charity shop I did. So Heavenly Pop Hit, I Love My Leather Jacket. Those are probably the two most famous songs I have, as in had radio play and had videos also, so they were on music TV. Pink Frost is one of their very early songs. People talk about that song, Pink Frost. And Pink Frost is kind of, when you hear that, it gives you a weird imagery, doesn't it? Pink Frost. People talk about that song. I've seen people write about that song and proclaim it to be like one of the greatest songs ever written and just a perfect song. Every time I listen to it, I just think, yeah, it's okay, but it's nothing special. It's like I can't get a handle on his songs, on their songs, and that's the same for a lot of that Dunedin sound stuff. Anyway, I'm speaking too long speaking about this. Okay, so I'm happy to have that, because I do like some chill songs, and I'll maybe get to listen to more, because I haven't listened to a whole lot of their stuff beyond the kind of singles, I guess. The other one I got was to add to my soundtrack collection, a movie from the 90s, Braveheart, the original motion picture soundtrack composed by James Horner and performed by the London Symphony Orchestra. So we've got 18 tracks. 95 this came out. I remember watching this. We hired it on VHS, me and my family, when I was a kid. Would have been probably about 95, 96, I guess. And it had quite a big effect on me as a kid, as a teenager. I really loved that movie, which a lot of people did. It was a huge movie, wasn't it? It won awards and made a lot of money for Mel Gibson, because it was his Icon Pictures is his production company, so he produced it, and I guess he made the lion's share of the profit would have gone back to him, I assume. Well, this is $33.95. Back in 1995, this was that much. I've said before that in today's money, that means that's about 60 some dollars there. There's one song on this that's kind of the, I guess, main title, which is kind of quite recognizable when you hear it. Anyway, are you happy to have that as well? Haven't listened through to it yet, but I will at some stage. The other thing I was going to talk about quickly is I showed this a couple of weeks ago. I got the Chicken Little soundtrack. Chicken Little was a Disney movie released in 2003 or 2005. And I listened to it last night. So 27th of April, this was bought, or thereabouts. So I bought it about a month ago. I listened to it last night. Very tired last night, so I kind of only listened to one or two things and then went to bed. But what I found interesting is some of the songs, most of the songs you already know, because a lot of them are covers, like It's Too Late, which is the Carole King one, We Are the Champions, which is Queen, and Wannabe, Spice Girls, Don't Go Breaking My Heart, Elton John. But the cast, or what do you call it? The actors who did the voice acting sung some of the songs. But what I noticed is that on this edition, there's 16 songs. But if you look online, like on the Wikipedia for this, or the Discogs page for this, or whatever, it says there's only 15 songs. So for some reason, this edition, don't know if it's just the New Zealand, Australasian edition maybe, has track 6 added. It's Too Late by Asher, or Usher. And I was listening to this last night, and I like that. I like the original Carole King version of that song. It's too late. It's like a classic song. And some songs, as you get, even though you've heard them 10,000 times, as you get older, you kind of come to appreciate the song more. Just like, I don't know, there's something about that song that every time I hear it, I like it more or something. But as I was kind of doing something and listening to it in the background, and then that song came on, and whoever Asher is has kind of got it's not Carole King. It's because she's got a more youthful voice. But I kind of liked it. I was like, I wasn't even consciously thinking, I was subconsciously kind of enjoying the song. And so when it finished, I kind of went back and thought, oh, who sung that? And so I saw Asher. And then I went to the Wikipedia, first of all, to find out who Asher is. So I searched on the the Chicken Little page, and I noticed the track wasn't there. And I was like, oh, maybe it's... So then I was like trying to search, I searched on Google, and some hits came up, but not much. There was no artist page for Asher. So I went to the Discogs, because usually Discogs has got some more in-depth thing about the songwriter. And even there was bugger. There was no... It didn't connect back to anyone. And then it was like, apparently it was an alias for some other person. And so then I went to Spotify this morning, and it's not on the Spotify either. And I also noticed on Spotify is that about 4 or 5 of the tracks, when you look at Spotify, an album, if the track is not playable, it will be kind of like, it's written there, but it'll be grayed out kind of. And I noticed a lot of them, you can't play it. Like, for example, which is not a great loss, to be honest, because it's not a very good song, All I Know by 5 for Fighting. You can't play that song on Spotify. So that kind of comes back again to what I've talked about before, and one of the one of the reasons why I like physical music, whether it be CDs or records or whatever else, is that at least you have the music there. It can't be taken off you. It can't be grayed out at some stage in the future. And a lot of people have been talking about that recently, how we don't know what the future holds in terms of music streaming, because so many musicians are talking about at the moment how even with touring, they're finding it hard to make money. Because, there was a time there, after the whole, the seismic shift of file sharing in the early 2000s and record companies, shitting the bed, and the whole landscape of the music industry changed, and artists up to a certain level were just not making money from sales of physical music anymore. Or at least it was not enough to kind of make a career out of, especially if you were like something like Taylor Swift, then okay, sure. But you're kind of regular mid-level artists, that wasn't possible. And so they were relying more and more on touring. And whereas in the past, touring was a loss leader, wasn't it? They were used to lose money on touring as a way to sell more records. But it kind of flipped around, and now they are making their money from touring and merchandise on the road, T-shirts and whatever else they sell at the merch tables. But since COVID, and I guess other things like inflation and everything else that's happened in the last 2 or 3 years, even touring has become unsustainable for a lot of bands. And you're seeing the last 2 years, a lot of bands have been cancelling tours of legs of their tours, because it's just not financially viable. They were going to be losing money or just breaking even if they went over to Europe for 6 weeks or whatever else. And so there's going to come a time, I feel, where there's going to have to be some sort of reorganization of payment of royalties for streaming of music. Because at the moment, again, unless you're like Taylor Swift or someone else having billions and billions of streams per year, you're not making that much money from Spotify. And in some cases, you're making like embarrassingly low money. And so there's going to have to come a time where they're going to have to do something about that, surely. It can't go on where I'm paying $15 a month to be able to listen to almost anything, and then the artist is seeing such a tiny percentage of that money. And so people are talking about how there's going to be a time where they're going to have to kind of divide the record labels up, and you're going to be having to pay, like now we pay for Amazon Prime and Netflix and Disney Plus. Well, I don't, but some people do. Well, it's going to be the same. You're going to be paying for the Sony library and the Warner's library and the Columbia library and the Atlantic Records library, and you have to, paying out all these different streaming fees so that artists can get compensated more fairly. And so, yeah, maybe that's going to happen. And maybe, and again, maybe there'll be a second resurgence of physical music. I doubt it though. But anyway, I ramble there. I'll leave it there. I've got to go do some things. Thanks for watching.